Okay, mostly we're going to talk about animal evolution, but I want you to see some bigger, broader trends too that happened that we've already kind of talked about in the last lecture that we had. So let's just kind of refresh a little bit of that stuff. Why animals? Well, think about it. You're an animal. So being animals ourselves, we have tremendous questions about, what our history is. And we really care about animal history. In particular, we care about vertebrate history and primate history. So we're going to spend a little bit more time on that in this unit. But let's take a look here at some of the big events that happened that have gotten us to this point right now. And we're going to keep referring back to our timelines a little bit as we go here. So these dates are not anything really hard and fast. The problem is do you want to report the date of the first fossil, the first evidence of the potential of, or the approximate date that we think something happened? So mostly these are dates of the first fossil evidence that we have for specific things, but prokaryotes come on the scene, that's bacteria, 3.8 billion years ago. So the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. That is very rapid. Like, that should be like shockingly rapid to you when you consider that it took some time for the early Earth to cool. So we have evidence of fossilized prokaryotes, or at least evidence of their existence, at about 3.8 billion years ago. That means that the Earth cools off, and boom, there's bacteria on it. Okay, that's interesting. I find it interesting. It takes a while. Time goes by, and then by about like 1.8 billion years ago, we start to see evidence of endosymbiosis, where one bacteria eats another bacteria, doesn't completely digest it, and it lives on inside of it. That creates the first complex cell. So within a very short order, we've created eukaryotes. And eukaryotic cells, remember, are cells that have things like a nucleus where the DNA is packaged up in there. They've got specialized organelles like chloroplasts or mitochondria like our cells have. We think those were ancient bacteria that became part of our cells. That's endosymbiotic theory. Some really interesting stuff. With that, almost immediately, like, we've created the first eukaryotes, and multicellularity starts to happen. Think about the kind of things that have to occur for cells to be able to not only work together, to be together, but then to recreate a creature that's similar to them, where its cells work together in similar fashion, and cells become specialized. So we start to see some evidence of that going back pretty far. And sexual reproduction falls back in there too, depending on where you want to call it. But bacteria do like sort of their own type of sexual reproduction, their mixing of genes. But actual sexual reproduction, like we might think of it in terms of multicelled creatures, is probably a little bit later on. But anyway, all this is happening through this immense span of Precambrian time. Okay? And we're going to fast forward quite a bit here because after all these things occur, we've set up the scene for large creatures on the planet for the first time, right? We have things like oxygen, multicellularity, eukaryotic cells, specialized cells, sexual reproduction. All of a sudden, life's about to take off, and it does in some pretty big booming starts. So to get started, let's define an animal. Okay? It's difficult to actually define kingdoms. It's difficult to define phylums somewhat in biology. We have some broad definitions, but the issue is that there's always an exception to the rule in biology. It's very difficult to pin something down when you consider things have evolved from common ancestors. It makes it difficult. But we can, by and large, say three things about animals. They're multicelled, more than one cell. They're heterotrophs, which means they eat other things. They're eukaryotic, which means we have complex cells, the nucleus, mitochondria, all those organelles we talked about. Okay. There are other things that many animals have, but not all. Many animals, if not most animals, move around. There are some that don't, like sponges. Those are animals too. So it's sometimes difficult to pin down a definition, but these three things really are pretty much what all animals have. Okay? So let's sort of see where animals actually came from. Now, the very first animals, and I say this with regards to these are the oldest living examples of something that we think is like the root of the tree of animal life. Okay, sponges, without a doubt. If I had to put my money on it, and I think most scientists would agree, sponges are probably the earliest form of animal life on our planet. They're so simple. You can take a sponge and pass its cells through a sieve, like bust them all apart, separate little cells, and they'll all get back together and make a new sponge. It'll look a little different than the original sponge, but they are very, very simple creatures with very simple organization of their cells. And they're animals. They filter feed in the water. They eat. They're heterotrophs, right? They're multi-celled. They have complex eukaryotic cells. The other contender here is actually a branch of jellies called the comb jellies. And that one looks very complex, doesn't it? Much more complex than the sponge. But recently they've done some genetic studies and found that comb jellies actually contain some very, very ancient DNA, pushing them way back on the tree of life. So it's possible that maybe comb jellies are some of the most ancient types of creatures. But this gives you an idea of what, when I say like the first animals, like you're thinking lions and tigers and bears and whatnot. No, this is what we're actually talking about when we're talking about the first animals. So let's kind of look at how like evolution kicked this off. Long period of time passes where it's just bacteria. There's not a whole heck of a lot in the fossil record. And then we start to see something unique. And this is known as the Ediacaran fauna. And it comes right before what's called the Cambrian Explosion that we're going to talk about in a second. See, it used to be that we thought that life was just like, boom, this Cambrian explosion, all this stuff happens, and then we discovered the Ediacaran fauna predating the Cambrian. So this is like the lead up. And there's a lot of soft-bodied creatures here. And to be honest with you, we don't know what to do with them. There is stuff here that is just weird. And I wrote here, you know, this is like life's strange experiment. It is. It's like life tried something out, and it all pretty much mostly went extinct. And it's probably not really related to anything that's still alive today. Most of this stuff is probably not. In fact, we're not sure whether we should call them protists. Protists like fungi creations. Are they algae? Are they something else entirely? Are they not even, you know, one of the kingdoms that we might consider? Like, they're certainly not a phyla that we know. But there's some really weird stuff here. This happens about 635 million years ago. So if you're looking at your timeline, it's just before the base where everything goes hog wild. Okay, it happens right after Snowball, or one of the Snowball Earth episodes occurs and thaws out. So a bunch of nutrients get dumped into the oceans. The stage is set for complex cells, and these things have it, right? So we'll talk a little bit about these. They're really unique. They're pretty cool creatures. But some of them, I think, undoubtedly are probably animals. Some of them, like, we're just really not sure about. So let's see what they look like. Here's kind of a scene from the Ediacaran. The Ediacaran is named after the Ediacara Hills in Australia, where it was first discovered. It's been found in other locations around the world. You got some real weird ones here. This big monster in the middle there is called Dickensonia. These things got up to like a meter in length. Some of them were really tiny. A lot of these things are either stuck or are just reclining on the bottom and don't move around. Dickensonia moved. I'm not really sure exactly how, but it moved across the ground and left marks where it moved. Other things like, for instance, Swart puntia over here, it actually kind of was on a stalk and filled with, this whole thing looked like a big sack. In fact, its fossils get preserved with mud inside, it's like a sack. How did it feed? We're not really sure. Maybe it absorbed nutrients through the water. It doesn't have a mouth, right? A lot of these creatures we assume were probably osmotic feeders. They absorb nutrients through their outer skin layer. But they don't. A lot of them don't have mouths, right? Just think about the evolution of a head and a butt. That's a big deal, right? And a lot of these things don't have that. So let's skip through, and I want to point out a couple of these in particular that are just kind of really neat and unique. The first one is Charnia. It was discovered in the Charnwood Forest over in England by a schoolboy. And this is actually a very, very famous fossil. What the heck is it? Well, first of all, look at it. It looks like a plant, doesn't it? And I realize here it's classified as an animal. We're honestly really not so certain about that. We definitely know it's not a plant, though, because it was growing deep enough in the ocean that no sunlight got down there. So no way photosynthesis was happening with this thing. So definitely not a plant. but maybe something else. Early animals or organisms like this had this bizarre fractal branching pattern. If you look at its like leaf frondish looking thing, it builds its body by fractally branching itself. No creatures alive do this. Think about insects that build by adding segments, leg pairs, segment. Nothing like this. This is a really unique kind of a body plan. So it's kind of a new thing. Anyway, we've got lots and lots of fossils. These are pretty neat. Some of them got very large, like a meter in length. Some of them were much shorter. A lot of diversity here in the Charnia type fossils. Fractophusis, another really weird one. This kind of looks like maybe just like a stamp mark on the bottom of the ocean. We think that these things laid on the mud, just reclined on the mud. We're not sure that if they moved or not. Probably not. They probably absorbed nutrients. We've got evidence of how they reproduced even. Like they would bud little bits off and they probably broke off the side and like grew their own little creatures. But another fractal branching, weird, pillowy looking creature. Okay. I mean, what do you do with that? What is that like today? There's like nothing alive today that's even remotely resembles. We struggle to put it into any kind of classification. Right? Here's another one, Dickensonia. We mentioned this guy already. This one did move. We know it moved. Some of these were up to a meter in length. It probably kind of must have somehow crawled across the ocean floor, probably absorbed nutrients from the algae mats that it was growing on. These things resemble kind of mattresses, like pillowy looking structures. And with each of these little chambers is filled with probably with fluid. Now there's some good questions we can ask. Is this truly multi-celled? Or is that all one cell? It's possible. Fungi do weird stuff like that. It's really, really questionable what's going on here because we don't know. Now there's some that we know a little bit more about, like Spargina here. Check this out. This thing has an end, doesn't it? You can obviously tell it has a head. Now I don't know if it's got an anal area, but it definitely has a head. I would assume that there is some sort of a mouth part underneath of there that it could eat with. It looks like it would move, right? It seems pretty obvious that this thing moved around. Still not very big, about 7.5 centimeters. So not super large, but bigger than some of this stuff. Probably crawled around on the bottom of the ocean. Maybe looks a little bit more arthropod-like, right? See the segmenting sort of thing going on there a little bit. This is my favorite right here. This is called Kimberella, and Kimberella is really cool. This thing evolves during the Ediacaran and actually pushes its way into the Cambrian. It survives the extinction event. It's got this proboscis on the end of it here that it actually scratches the algae that it's growing on with. It moves around. We've all kinds of tracks, and it scratches. And it's feeding with that thing that sticks off the front of it. Is that not a weird-looking thing? No, remember, all of these are soft-bodied. They're not hard structures. We think that this might be related to some of the later mollusks. So this is one where we can look at and go, we might kind of group that with like snails and clams and all that stuff. It's probably related to them. And it survives the extinction and kind of moves forward after a lot of this stuff goes extinct. Let's take a look at what a scene might have looked like during the Ediacaran, just before what we call the Cambrian Explosion. Here you go. So we're kind of swimming through the ocean here, and there's some creatures we didn't talk about that you'll notice here, these big stalk-like things. They're not plants. Okay, I think that was Kimberella down there we just passed. Here's Dickensonia right here that we're coming up on, feeding on the bottom of the ocean. As we kind of turn the corner here, I think we're going to see Spargina there. Something kind of probably crawling across the surface of rocks and things like that in the ocean. So it's kind of a chill place. Do you notice something there that's really missing? Nothing really probably has teeth, right? You don't notice any predators. Everything in that picture is either soaking up water from the ocean and like absorbing nutrients or feeding off the algae on the ground. There's not like predation going on. These things are tremendously like in a bad position if something wants to eat them. They're just floating on the bottom of the ocean. It's not a great place to be if there's something that's out there hunting. So when does hunting come about? Well, a lot of stuff happens right here at what we call the Cambrian Explosion. So we're at about 500 million years ago, so just right after this episode of all these soft-bodied, creepy, weirdo-looking things that are so alien-looking, all of a sudden this massive radiation of all these different types of animal life occurs. And every single animal phyla that we know of, for the most part, can be traced back to this. So when you're thinking about things like water bears and velvet worms and mollusks and arthropods and brachiopods and fish and all the things that we think about, they have their origins back here in the Cambrian. So something happened, right? Probably one of the big things that occurred was the evolution of the eye and predation. So those poor Ediacaran things didn't have much of a chance. Like, these things were going to chomp them down pretty quick, right? And think about how important it would be to have eyes to be able to see where you're going if you're going to eat other things. So those things alone made a big difference in life and changed the surface of the planet. This is all still happening in the ocean, by the way. Okay, I know some of those things aren't in the ocean, but we're all still in the ocean. 500 million years ago, and our timeline, we're just at the base of where everything's about to go haywire. Like, life is going to explode. So let's look at some of these weirdo Cambrian creatures. They're weird. I mean, believe me, they're really bizarre looking still, but we can figure out kind of what they're related to. So while I say they're bizarre, I'm also saying they're related to current animal phyla that we do know. This is Hallucigenia, and Hallucigenia was one of those fossils that they discovered. It's actually very tiny, just a couple centimeters. It's a really little guy. Looks big here, it's blown up. They discovered it, and they didn't know which one was if there was a head and if there was a butt. They, in fact, didn't even know which way it went. They drew it like this, and they thought that's maybe how it went. And later on, after some more fossils were discovered, it was found that it actually went like that. So it got its name because the scientists that discovered it thought, it's like a hallucination. Never seen anything like this. This is really weird. It's got all these crazy spiky things on top of it. Why would it have spiky things on top of it? Because stuff's trying to eat it, right? It's protection. You don't see that before this point. The Cambrian's like, stuff's got to be protected. There are things chomping down on you. There's a little bit of decay fluid there out this end, but the head end's actually to the right, and it's kind of bent down with this like proboscis-looking thing. Its legs have these funny little hooks on the ends of them. They're really weird looking. In a recreation, you get a little bit better idea. This is probably what it looked like. Now, we have no idea what color it is for sure, right? Any of this, but this is a drawing of what it might have looked like. Bizarre, right? They're actually very small. Okay, let's look at a few other ones. Well, Waxia is a pretty cool one. It actually has these chitinous spines and scales on its body. Why does it have that stuff? Probably because things are trying to eat it. Kind of looks like a funny little, I don't know, critter like scurrying around on the bottom of the ocean floor, right? Real weird looking though. Still though, we're pretty sure that this is related to the mollusk group. So we can put it in a group. We know where they go. Definitely an animal. Last one was definitely an animal. We're certain we're in the animal kingdom now. This next one is honestly one of my favorites. I just love the way it looks. I love the fact that it has eyeballs on stalks. It has these compound eyes that stick up on little bulbous stalks. This thing looks like it could be from some alien sci-fi movie, does it not? It's got a mouth with jaws looking things on the end of this long proboscis that it can move around like this and snatch stuff up. It's a hunter. It's digging around under the mud. It's finding things to catch and eat. It swims, right? It's a weird looking creature. It is one of the predators of the oceans at this time. Definitely in the animal kingdom. You can see the segmentation right there, right? We're talking about arthropod here. And we'll talk more about what that means later on, but it's got segments like any arthropod would have. Here's an artist's recreation of it. I just think it's a beautiful looking fossil. It's just really wild. Look at the eyeballs on that. In fact, we can trace what this is related to today. It's pretty cool. This one is the favorite of most people who study this time period. This is known as Anomalocaris, and I think in Latin that roughly translates into scary shrimp, because it's related to shrimp and is pretty scary. This is the big hunter of the ocean. This is the apex predator. This is the thing that everything that lives during this time is afraid of. And some of these got pretty big, like, I don't know, a meter-ish, I don't know, pretty big. Some were smaller. They first discovered the appendages on the ends of its face here, these hook-like things, and they thought that was the fossil. And then later on, they discovered it was actually attached to this larger creature that we call Anomalocaris. But it also had these stalk-like eyes. This guy was a hunter. Look at that thing. Be afraid if you're a small thing living in the ocean and this is around. Pretty wild, huh? If you want to see something that looks an awful lot like this, look up the mantid shrimp. They're pretty cool. Some videos of those things online. Okay, this wouldn't be complete without talking about this guy right here. And this is one of the more important fossils that we actually have. And it's known as Pachaya. Pachaya is the first evidence we have of something special, a chordate. Why is that special? Because you're a chordate. You have a notochord that becomes your backbone. This is the first place we see that. In other words, what I'm saying is that this thing is related to all of the fishes, all of the amphibians, all of the reptiles, all the mammals, all the dinosaurs, all the birds in the world. Trace their ancestry back to this guy or something that's related to this guy. It's the first evidence of chordate that we have, which is really interesting. It's really exciting. So this thing definitely swimming around. It's got this tiny wee little head up here with these. It actually has gills. Okay, it's very complex looking. Okay, definitely one of the early chordates. So what does this look like during this time? Let's take a look. This is the Cambrian period, about 543 million years ago. The Cambrian Explosion occurs right after the Ediacaran fauna. As we're flying through here, you can see, you're going to see there's an Opalbenia coming up towards us there. There's some Waxia swimming over top of. There goes a Pachaya. Oh, look out. Oh, there you go, an Anomalocaris, the hunters of the deep, right? You can see some Hallucigenia up there. Pretty cool. So the ocean looks like something now. During the Cambrian, everything's a lot more recognizable. So let's fast forward a lot and jump all the way into the late Devonian. So 368 million years ago, the evolution of the tetrapod. Now, tetrapod means like 4 pods, so 4 appendages. Did you ever wonder why animals and reptiles and heck, birds and amphibians, why we all have 4 appendages for the most part? It dates all the way back to the fish. So if we push this way back, we'll see things like coelacanths and lungfish. Yes, the lung first develops in a fish. It develops in a fish. It becomes a swim bladder for a lot of fish. But we can trace this back to like the coelacanth that has the first development of a shoulder and a wrist bones. A fish with the shoulder joints. And now this thing, like the lungfish, can crawl out of a puddle that's drying up, walk across the land, breathe air, crawl into another puddle. Those things are still alive today. We still look at them today, as well as the coelacanth. And we move through time, we see weird things like Tiktaalik, amazing, fantastic fossil, transitions into tetrapods on land. So this thing's definitely on land. It's one of the first, as you would, amphibians. It still goes back to the water to lay eggs and do everything else. Probably has to stay moist or it can't breathe. It'll dry up. But it's definitely spending a ton of time on land. And we can push that all the way through and forward to things today. I'm taking some giant leaps here. Everybody got that one? Kind of have to if we're going to go through this fast. The next one is the reptiles. So from the early tetrapods, we get the amphibians. From the amphibian group, that whole group branches off into the reptiles. And the reptiles are a humongous group. But there's one adaptation that allows them to move onto land really far from water. And that's the amniotic egg. The amniote develops, and you're an amniote. Okay, I know we carry our eggs inside a placenta, but there's mammals that actually lay eggs, right? The platypus, right? The spiny anteater, they lay eggs, they're mammals. That's an ancient way of doing it. And this is a big group. Everything over here on the right of this is a reptile pretty much. All this big reptile group over here. So the egg, it's a big thing, important part. Then we hit a mass extinction, the biggest one of all time. It's called the Permian. It's called the Great Dying. Okay? It takes some time to occur, but by about 252 million years ago, 95% of all life in the ocean is dead, all species. 70% of all species on land are dead. This is a big one. This is the biggest one of all time. And I'll just say this about it. We think that it had to do with climate change. If that's not a message for you, I don't know what is. In fact, most of these mass extinctions we'll talk about have to do with rapid climate change. And this one probably had to do with the Siberian traps, a volcano erupting lots and lots of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Okay, and some other scenarios, there's a lot other that goes into that, but it wiped out life on the planet, like hard. After the Permian and all this stuff gets wiped out, the stuff that survives gives rise to a rapid evolutionary trend. And we suddenly see these guys. This big mass extinction, and boom, dinosaurs come on the scene. And dinosaurs rapidly get big and take over all the habitats. Pretty cool. And you've probably heard Triassic, Jurassic Park, right? Cretaceous. At the end of the Cretaceous, there's going to be something that occurs. Okay. But before we get to that, during this time, during the Triassic, while the dinosaurs are evolving, another group is evolving as well, a group near and dear to our hearts, and we call them the mammals. About the same time the dinosaurs are coming on the scene, mammals are as well. They also evolved from a reptilian ancestor, as do the dinosaurs. In fact, many of these guys have some very reptilian traits as well. They're probably very small, nocturnal, living at night, eating insects. They're warm-blooded, which is a distinct characteristic that we all have. We're endotherms. We heat our bodies up from the inside, probably because they're trying to be active at night. Why? Dinosaurs are scary. Mammals at this time are scurrying around hiding from the dinosaurs. Those things are going to snatch you up like a little snack. Right? So what happens? What's the big event that allows mammals to take off and rule the world? What is it? It's a big event. It's an important one. Okay, we'll come back to it. First, let's talk about this group. The birds. The birds also come about during the time of the dinosaurs, near the end here, and they trace their ancestry back to the theropod dinosaurs, one group that includes things like Velociraptor and T-Rex. All those dinosaurs with the tiny little forearms, okay, and the big teeth, those guys all had feathers. Yeah, even T-Rex. They are birds, okay? Birds are firmly in the clade Dinosauria. Like, they're dinosaurs. They're the descendants of the dinosaurs. And we can see that clearly in the fossils. But this is the big one that knocks them out, the mass extinction. Okay, it's not as big as the Permian. The KT mass extinction, we get hit by a meteor, a big one. This thing wipes out the dinosaurs, leaving the mammals, some of the small mammals behind, and the small mammals rapidly diversify to all the lions and tigers and bears and, muskox that you see today. So an awful lot happens, but this is the key to our big success. If this hadn't occurred, probably still be ruled by dinosaurs. Mammals would probably be still little rat-like things running around underneath the dinosaurs' feet. This opened up all the niches for mammals to diversify into, this big mass extinction. There's been 5 big giant mass extinctions. We're probably on the cusp of the next one right now. What's that probably being caused by? Not a meteor, not a volcano, climate change. Probably being caused by humans. Many of these mass extinctions are climate events. This impact here was a full-scale climatary event across the whole planet. Climate changed drastically, and life doesn't do well when that occurs, right? So let's leave it with this last bit here, because we fast forward right to the end and take a second before we answer this. Hominids come on the scene about 6 million years ago. Not Homo sapiens yet. Hominids branch off from the same line that chimpanzees and bonobos branch off from, about 6 million years ago. But it's not until somewhere around about 200,000 years, which is very recently, that modern man and woman, Homo sapiens, come about. Okay? And you would probably call them cavemen, right? But those are actually Homo sapiens. That's us. But the Homo family tree is big. There's loads of different creatures in here that lived sometimes alongside of us. Homo neanderthalensis, right? Homo erectus, Homo ergaster, right? Homo sediba. Like there's lots and lots and lots of them. And there's some other big groups too that are all extinct. The Australopithecines, the Ardipithecus group, the Paranthropus group. Those are all some big branches of this tree that we'll talk more about later on when we get more into this. But it's really interesting to see kind of like where we're at. And of course, we dominate the world now. Right? It's not taken us very long at all to control everything. But remember, we have been on the scene for a blink of the eye compared to what the dinosaurs saw. Right? They didn't have a chance when that meteor hit us. Right? And we've developed all this society and culture. It's pretty neat, right? We've definitely changed the face of the entire planet. Okay, go ahead and hit submit on your quiz.